The Jumbo. The original Patek Philippe Nautilus reference 3700, designed by Gerald Gente and released in 1976. At 42 millimeters, it was considered oversized for a dress watch brand entering the sports watch market for the first time. Collectors called it the Jumbo. The same nickname was applied to the original Audemars Piguet Royal Oak from 1972, which Gente also designed. Both watches were considered too large for their era. Both were designed by the same man. Both were called the Jumbo. The word traveled between two brands because the designer was the common variable, not the manufacturer. Gente reportedly sketched the Nautilus on a napkin during a trade fair. That sketch produced a watch that now trades for over $100,000 in vintage condition. The napkin did not survive. The name did. The Jumbo has since extended loosely to the reference 5711, the modern successor to the 3700, though purists reserve the term for the original. When Patek discontinued the 5711 in 2021, secondary market prices spiked to multiples of the retail price. A watch that listed for approximately $35,000 was trading at over $100,000 within months. The discontinuation announcement itself functioned as a price event, not because the watch became better, but because the supply became finite. The porthole. The Nautilus case is shaped like a ship's porthole. The rounded octagonal bezel with its two lateral ears, the horizontally grooved dial, the integrated bracelet. Gente's design brief was nautical. The porthole nickname describes the most visible feature of the case architecture. The porthole is less a nickname and more a design descriptor. It is used interchangeably with Nautilus itself. But it reveals something about how collectors talk about this watch. They do not describe it by its movement, its complications, or its water resistance. They describe it by the shape of its case. The silhouette is the identity. Everything inside the silhouette is secondary in conversation. This is unusual for Patek Philippe. The brand's reputation is built on what happens inside the case. Movement finishing, complication engineering, the Geneva seal, the Patek Philippe seal. These are the attributes that justify Patek's position at the top of the horological hierarchy. But the Nautilus is famous for its outside, its shape, its porthole. The watch that made Patek Philippe accessible to a broader audience did so by being recognized on sight, not by being understood on inspection. The Tiffany. The reference 5711/1A-018, a Nautilus with a Tiffany blue dial, co-signed with the Tiffany & Company logo at 6 o'clock, limited to 170 pieces, released in 2021 to mark 170 years of the Patek Philippe and Tiffany & Company partnership. The first example sold at Phillips auction on December 11, 2021 for $6.5 million. The watch retailed for approximately $53,000. That is a return of roughly 120 times the retail price, realized at auction within days of the watch's existence being announced to the public. The Tiffany Nautilus is the most extreme example of what a co-branded dial can do to pricing. The watch underneath is mechanically identical to every other 5711. Same case, same movement, same bracelet, same water resistance. The modification is a color change on the dial and a second brand name printed in small type. That modification is worth millions. Tiffany & Company remains the only retailer in the world whose name appears on a Patek Philippe dial. That exclusivity, combined with the 170-piece limitation and the cultural moment of the 5711 discontinuation, created a pricing event that no specification sheet could explain. The Tiffany is not a watch. It is a convergence of brand equity, artificial scarcity, and auction theater. The first example that went to auction was lot number 1T at Phillips, New York on December 11th, 2021. The pre-sale estimate was listed at $20,000 to $40,000, which everyone involved understood was ceremonial. The final hammer price of $6.5 million represented a moment where the secondary market priced a brand collaboration, not a mechanical object. All proceeds from that specific lot went to the Nature Conservancy. A charity received $6.5 million because two brand logos appeared on the same dial at the same time that the most desired stainless steel watch in the world was being discontinued. No specification sheet has ever been worth $6.5 million. No movement finishing, no complication. The price was for the story, and the story was the nickname, Tiffany, the grenade. The Aquanaut's dial features a textured embossed pattern of irregular geometric shapes. The pattern resembles the surface texture of a fragmentation grenade. Collectors called it the grenade. The Aquanaut debuted in 1997 as a sportier, more accessible sibling to the Nautilus. It was Patek Philippe's first watch on a rubber strap, which was considered borderline disrespectful to the brand's heritage at the time. A Patek on rubber. The horror. The grenade nickname is notable because it is one of the few Patek nicknames that references a weapon. Rolex nicknames reference sodas, superheroes, and cartoon characters. Patek's collector base looked at a textured dial and saw military ordnance. The vocabulary reflects the audience. Rolex collectors think in pop culture. Patek collectors think in objects of precision engineering, even when naming a dial pattern, the tropical. The Aquanaut's rubber strap is officially called the tropical strap by Patek Philippe. This is one of the rare cases where the brand itself provided the nickname before collectors could. The tropical strap was revolutionary when it launched. No serious haute or lingerie brand had paired a luxury watch with a rubber strap as a standard offering. Patek did it and named it. The name choice was deliberate. Tropical evokes travel, warm climates, outdoor activity. It reframes rubber from a cheap material into an aspirational one. The word does the repositioning that the material alone could not. The Disco Volante, Italian for flying saucer, applied by Italian collectors in the 1950s and 1960s to watches with extra-wide bezels, short or concealed lugs, and disc-like case profiles. At Patek Philippe, the reference 2594 earned this name. The Disco Volante is not exclusive to Patek, Omega, and Audemars. Piguet models from the same era received the same nickname. Gerald Genta is said to have designed the Audemars Piguet version, though his involvement with other brands' Disco Volante models is unclear. The nickname matters because it originated in the Italian collector market, which was one of the earliest and most influential communities in establishing vocabulary for vintage watches. Italian auctioneers and dealers named the Paul Newman Daytona. Italian collectors coined the Disco Volante. Italian terminology runs through the entire watch nickname ecosystem because Italy was where the secondary market developed its language before the internet globalized it. When an Italian collector in the 1960s looked at a wide, flat Patek with hidden lugs and saw a flying saucer, he was not trying to create a marketing asset. He was describing a shape in conversational Italian. That description became permanent because it was accurate, memorable, and predated any competing term. The Neptune. The Patek Philippe Neptune was a short-lived collection launched in 1996 with the reference 5080, followed by the more complicated reference 5085. The Neptune featured a fish-scale pattern bracelet and a sportier aesthetic than the Nautilus. The Neptune has been called a sleeper hit. It was discontinued before the luxury steel sports watch craze reached its current intensity. Had it been launched a decade later, during the period when steel Nautilus references were trading at 5 to 10 times retail, the Neptune might have achieved cult status. Instead, the Neptune exists as a discontinued Patek Philippe sports watch that most collectors have never encountered. Its relative obscurity is what makes it interesting to the subset of collectors who define their taste by what the mainstream has not yet discovered. The Neptune is not expensive because it is famous. It is interesting because it is not. The 1518. The reference 1518 is the first serially produced wristwatch with both a perpetual calendar and a chronograph. Patek Philippe produced it from 1941 to 1954 in gold and an extremely small number in steel. The steel versions are among the rarest wristwatches in existence. A steel 1518 sold at Philips in 2016 for over $11 million. The 1518 is not a nickname. It is a reference number. And that is the point. Patek Philippe collectors do not, as a rule, use nicknames. They use reference numbers. The 4-digit number is the identity: 1518 2499 3700 5711 5712. Each number carries an entire history, a production count, a complication set, a case material range, and an auction record. At Rolex, saying 126710BLNR communicates nothing to anyone outside the collector community, so collectors say Batman. At Patek Philippe, saying 1518 communicates everything to everyone inside the collector community. The reference number is sufficient because the audience already knows what it means. Nicknames are a communication tool for communities where the audience is broad and the knowledge level varies. Reference numbers work for communities where the audience is narrow and the knowledge level is uniformly high. Patek does not need nicknames because Patek collectors do not need simplification. The 2499, the successor to the 1518, perpetual calendar chronograph, produced from 1950 to 1985, approximately 349 pieces total across 4 series: yellow gold, white gold, rose gold, and 2 known examples in platinum. At least 11 examples of the 2499 have sold at auction for over $2 million each. The platinum version, once owned by Eric Clapton, set a record when it appeared. The 2499 is the standard against which all other complicated vintage watches are measured. The number 2499 functions in collector conversation the way Pepsi functions in Rolex conversation. It is an identity marker. It signals what you know, what you own, and what you aspire to. The difference is that 2499 does this without translating itself into a consumer brand reference. It stays in its own language. The Calatrava. The Calatrava is Patek Philippe's dress watch collection, named after the Calatrava cross that serves as the brand's logo. The reference 96, launched in 1932, established the template. Simple dial. Precious metal case. Manual wound movement. The archetypal dress watch. The Calatrava name did not officially appear until 1985. Collectors retroactively applied it to every dress watch that fit the design language established by the reference 96. This is the inverse of how nicknames normally work. Usually, collectors name a watch and the brand ignores it. With the Calatrava, the brand eventually named the watch and collectors accepted it retroactively. The formalization went in the expected direction, but decades late. The Calatrava also demonstrates how a brand name can function as a nickname in disguise. Nobody at Patek Philippe in 1932 called the reference 96 a Calatrava. It was simply the dress watch. The name was applied after the fact, both by the brand and by collectors, to organize a lineage of watches that shared a design philosophy. The Calatrava is less a product name and more a retroactive category label that acquired the emotional weight of a proper name through decades of repetition. The World Timer. Patek Philippe's World Time watches date back to the 1930s, when the brand collaborated with watchmaker Louis Cotier, who invented the World Time complication. Cotier's mechanism displays all 24 time zones simultaneously on a single dial using rotating rings. The vintage reference 1415 is among the most valuable world time watches ever produced. Modern references like the 5131 and 5231 continue the tradition with cloisonné enamel dial maps and updated movements. Collectors rarely shorten World Timer to a nickname. They say the reference number, or they say World Timer. The complication is the identity. What makes this significant is that Patek's World Time watches are among the most visually distinctive in the entire catalog. The dial literally shows a map of the Earth. If any Patek watch were going to earn a visual nickname, the World Timer would be the candidate. It is not, because the complication description is already vivid enough. The Sky Moon. The Celestial and the Sky Moon Tourbillon are among Patek Philippe's most complex grand complications. The Sky Moon Celestial displays a rotating map of the night sky on the dial, showing the stars of the northern hemisphere as they would appear above Geneva. The Sky Moon Tourbillon reference 6002 is a double-faced watch, with one dial showing the time and a second dial on the reverse showing the night sky. It is one of the most mechanically ambitious wristwatches in existence. These watches are not nicknamed because they do not circulate in the kinds of markets where nicknames are generated. They are produced in extremely small quantities, sold to pre-selected clients, and rarely appear at auction. The secondary market conversation that generates nicknames at Rolex simply does not occur at this tier of production. A watch that fewer than 100 people on Earth can purchase does not need a searchable shorthand. Its buyers already know its name. The Golden Ellipse, introduced in 1968. The case is shaped as an ellipse, derived from the golden ratio of 1 to 1.618. The proportions are drawn from the same mathematical relationship used in Renaissance architecture and classical art. The Golden Ellipse is an official product name, but it functions as a nickname in collector conversation because it is more evocative than any 4-digit reference number could be. The name contains the design principle. Golden describes both the material and the mathematical ratio. Ellipse describes the case shape. Everything you need to understand the watch is embedded in 2 words. The Golden Ellipse has been produced in various configurations for over 50 years. It has never achieved the cultural visibility of the Nautilus or the auction dominance of the perpetual calendar chronographs. It occupies a quiet corner of the Patek catalog where design matters more than complication count, and the customer base is smaller and more self-selecting. The Gondolo. Named after the Gondolo and Laborio jewelry firm in Brazil, which was a major Patek Philippe retailer in the early 20th century. Patek produced a series of large, high-grade watches for Gondolo that became collector items in their own right. Patek later used the Gondolo name for a collection of tonneau and rectangular-cased watches. The connection between the modern Gondolo collection and the original Gondolo retailer watches is atmospheric, rather than mechanical. The name carries historical weight without carrying design continuity. The Grandmaster Chime. The reference 6300A-010. Patek Philippe's most complicated wristwatch ever produced. 20 complications in a single case. The steel version, made as a one-off for the Only Watch charity auction in 2019. Sold for $31 million. making it the most expensive wristwatch ever sold at auction. The Grandmaster chime is not really a nickname. It is the official product name, but it functions differently from other Patek product names. The Nautilus describes a shape. The Calatrava describes a heritage symbol. The Grandmaster chime describes a hierarchy. Grand, master. The name positions the watch at the apex of mechanical watchmaking before you know anything about its specifications. $31 million for a steel watch. The material is the least expensive that Patek uses. The value is entirely in the complications, the craftsmanship, and the fact that only one exists in steel. A platinum Grandmaster chime would be worth more in material terms. The steel version is worth more in collector terms because uniqueness outranks preciousness every time. The 96, the first, Calatrava, 1932, 31 millimeters, manual wind. Small seconds at 6 o'clock, gold case. The reference 96 remained in production for over 40 years. Again, not a nickname, a reference number. But within Patek collector circles, 96 functions as shorthand for the origin of modern dress watch design. Saying 96 is saying Bauhaus minimalism applied to wristwatch form. It is saying the beginning of a design language that persists nearly a century later. 4 digits. 90 years of context. The 5712. The Nautilus reference. 5712 features an asymmetric dial layout with a moon phase display, power reserve indicator, and small second subdial. The unusual dial arrangement sets it apart from the symmetrical 5711 and has given it a dedicated following. Collectors do not call the 5712 anything other than the 5712. There is no soda name, no cartoon character, no celebrity association. The 4 digits are the identity. And within the subset of Nautilus collectors, saying 5712 instantly communicates a preference for complication over simplicity, for asymmetry over convention, and for mechanical depth over clean design. The 5712 trades at a significant premium over its retail price. It is arguably the most respected complicated Nautilus reference in the current catalog. And it has no nickname because it does not need one. The audience knows. Every brand in the watch industry exists somewhere on a spectrum between nickname culture and reference number culture. At one end, Rolex, where nearly every watch has a name derived from pop culture, and the reference numbers are functionally invisible in public conversation. At the other end, Patek Philippe, where the reference numbers are the conversation and nicknames are the exception. The few Patek nicknames that exist tend to fall into specific categories: architectural descriptions, jumbo, porthole, disco volante. These name what the watch looks like. Material descriptions, grenade, tropical. These name a texture or a strap. Collaborative descriptions, Tiffany. This names a partnership. What Patek does not have is the pop culture layer. There is no Patek Batman, no Patek Hulk, no Patek Pepsi. The brand's price point, production volume, and collector demographic do not generate that kind of vocabulary. Patek watches are too expensive and too scarce to become casual cultural references. They exist in a market where everyone buying already knows the reference number. There's no need to translate the product into a more accessible word, because accessibility was never the goal. Rolex needs nicknames because Rolex operates at a scale where millions of potential buyers need a way to identify specific watches without studying a catalog. Patek does not need nicknames because Patek produces approximately 68,000 watches per year, and every person buying one already speaks the language. The absence of nicknames is not a failure of collector creativity. It is a reflection of market structure. Nicknames are a scaling tool. They make products findable, discussable, and shareable across audiences with different levels of knowledge. When the audience is already expert and the product is already scarce, the scaling tool is unnecessary. Patek Philippe does not have an extensive nickname economy because Patek Philippe does not have a communication problem. The reference numbers work. The 4 digits carry the full weight of the watch's identity, history, complication set, and market value. Nothing needs to be simplified. Nothing needs to be translated. The watches that do have nicknames, the Jumbo, the Tiffany, the Grenade, earned them because they crossed into broader cultural awareness. The Jumbo was shocking for its size. The Tiffany was shocking for its price at auction. The Grenade was memorable for its texture. Each nickname marks a moment where a Patek Philippe watch became visible to an audience wider than the brand's core collector base. The nicknames mark the edges. The reference numbers hold the center.